You thought baptism was just water, a ceremony, a photo moment, a tradition passed down from generations. But what if I told you, baptism isn't soft, it's violent? What if I told you, baptism is where hell loses its grip and heaven marks territory? You're not here by accident. You've been wondering if that water meant anything. You've been asking if what you did years ago was real, if it even mattered. Or maybe you've been avoiding it altogether, not out of rebellion, but confusion. Because no one ever told you what baptism truly is. No one ever told you this is where the old dies and the divine begins. No one ever told you this isn't about getting wet, it's about getting marked. And deep down, your spirit knows that you were meant to be buried so that you could rise. This isn't just another video. This is heaven interrupting your understanding of religion. This is the scalpel of truth cutting through cultural Christianity. Because today, you'll see what no one ever showed you. Baptism isn't a symbol of commitment, it's a declaration of war. Baptism was never meant to be public. It was meant to be prophetic. You've been told baptism is a public declaration, a way to tell your friends and family that you now follow Jesus. But nowhere in Scripture was the focus ever on the crowd, because baptism was never about them watching. It was about you dying. It was never meant to impress people. It was meant to offend the spirit of the world that used to own you. This moment wasn't designed to make you feel clean. It was designed to bury what used to rule you. When Jesus was baptized, the heavens tore open. The Spirit descended like a dove, and the Father spoke. Matthew 3:16-17 says, "Heaven was opened, and a voice from heaven said, 'This is my beloved Son.'" This wasn't a performance. It was a heavenly unveiling of divine identity and assignment. The waters didn't wash Jesus. They revealed him. And the same is true for you. Baptism is not just about repentance. It's a prophetic picture of death and resurrection, silence and awakening, surrender and empowerment. The water isn't a stage. It's a funeral for the flesh and a womb for the spirit. And maybe that's why it scares you, because something in you knows. Once you go under, you can't go back. The version of you that comes out of that water can no longer belong to fear, shame, or sin. You will never again be allowed to settle in the shallow. You will be marked by depth, by surrender, by heaven's hand. Baptism isn't public expression, it's prophetic execution. Water doesn't wash you, it kills you. The lie is subtle, that baptism is about being washed, about becoming clean, as if the water has some mystical power to scrub your past away. But this isn't a bath, it's a burial. Romans 6:4 says, "We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death." Not rinsed, not refreshed, buried. The old you doesn't walk out of that water dripping and improved. The old you stays dead at the bottom. We've made baptism gentle, respectable, comfortable. But in heaven's eyes it's violent, raw, final. Because the cross didn't improve Jesus, it killed him. And baptism is your cross. The water is the grave. And the only way out is resurrection. You can't carry pride under that water. You can't bring addiction, or bitterness, or secret rebellion. The weight of the old man has to sink. And if you're still holding on to parts of your past, maybe you didn't drown deeply enough. This is why some walk away from baptism unchanged. They thought it was symbolic. But heaven thought it was surgical. This isn't a rinse for your reputation. It's a reset for your resurrection. So, stop asking the water to cleanse you. Ask it to kill what God never meant to live. Hell doesn't fear your decision. It fears your burial. The enemy doesn't flinch when you raise your hand in church. He doesn't panic when you pray a prayer out loud. But he trembles when you go under that water. Because hell can handle your emotion, but it cannot handle your execution. Your decision to follow Jesus may start in your heart, but it's the moment you're buried in obedience that the war turns. Colossians 2:12-13 says, "You were buried with him in baptism, and God made you alive with Christ." What does that mean? It means baptism isn't your idea, it's your inheritance. It's not just your faith made visible, it's heaven's ownership made irreversible. Demons recognize what modern churches have forgotten. Baptism breaks legal ground. It severs claims. It closes doors. It ends contracts signed in sin. No wonder the devil fights it so hard. No wonder religion reduces it to a ritual. No wonder some of you have delayed it, not because you're not ready, but because the war in your soul knows how final it truly is. You've wondered why the oppression hasn't lifted. You've prayed, fasted, worshipped, and still felt stuck. But here's the truth no one told you. Deliverance begins with burial. Baptism is where old covenants are drowned, where familiar spirits are denied access, where generational curses lose their grip, because you no longer belong to that bloodline. You were raised into a new one. This is not religious tradition. This is legal warfare, and the courtroom of heaven already ruled in your favor, if you're willing to go all the way under. You weren't just washed. You were transferred. You didn't just get cleansed. You got relocated. Baptism isn't the end of sin's story. It's the beginning of kingdom jurisdiction. It's where your spiritual address gets changed in the eyes of heaven and hell. Colossians 1:13 declares, "He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of His beloved Son." Transferred. Not improved, not upgraded, uprooted. You've been shifted from one dominion to another, from curse to covenant, from striving to sonship. But here's the tragedy. Most believers still live like they never left Egypt. They've crossed the water, but kept the chains, because no one taught them what that water meant. No one told them that stepping into the Jordan was a declaration of detachment, that every idol, every identity, every inheritance of the old world had to stay behind. So they went under the water, but came up still loyal to fear, still addicted to approval, still wearing the garments of their past season. But that's not how God sees you. In heaven's eyes, you're no longer under accusation, because you've been transferred. You're no longer under condemnation, because your citizenship has shifted. You're no longer under generational cycles, because the line was severed the moment you were buried. You're not just forgiven, you've been reassigned, and the enemy knows. If you ever truly understood where you now belong, you'd stop praying like a beggar and start walking like an heir. Baptism isn't just an act of faith, it's a passport to a new realm. God didn't ask you to change, He asked you to die. The gospel never said, "Try harder." It said, "Die daily." But most churches won't say that, because death doesn't sell well. That's why baptism feels uncomfortable, because your flesh knows exactly what it means. It's not improvement, it's execution. Galatians 2:20 doesn't say, "I was upgraded with Christ." It says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me." Crucified, not comforted, not patched up, put to death. But this is the part of baptism modern Christianity avoids, the dying part. We want resurrection without a cross. We want power without surrender. We want transformation without letting go. So we come to the water, expecting a touch. But God was planning a funeral. And here's the truth. God cannot anoint what you refuse to bury. If pride is still breathing, if bitterness still governs, if lust still lingers in the corners of your will, then resurrection will feel foreign, because the old self is still alive. This is why some of you feel stuck. You've tried to worship your way to breakthrough, but your flesh is still on the throne. You've asked God to fix your mindset, but He's asking you to crucify it, because resurrection life only flows where death has fully settled. This isn't about turning over a new leaf. It's about letting the old tree burn to the roots. When you go under that water, you are agreeing with heaven that the version of you bound to sin, fear, and self is unworthy to survive. That is mercy. That is grace. That is baptism. Heaven never spoke until Jesus went under. There's a reason God waited. Jesus had lived 30 years, in obedience, in purity, in hiddenness, but heaven remained silent until the water. Matthew 3:16-17 says, "As soon as Jesus was baptized, heaven was opened, and a voice said, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.'" God didn't speak when Jesus was born. He didn't shout when Jesus taught in the temple at 12. He waited for baptism. Why? Because baptism is the moment when identity is confirmed by heaven. It's not when you earn it, it's when you receive it. Before Jesus performed a single miracle, before he cast out a single demon, before he preached to thousands, he went into the water, and only then did the heavens open. Only then did the Spirit descend. Only then did the Father speak. Why do you think the enemy resists your baptism? Because he knows what happens when you go under. You stop needing man's validation. You stop asking religion who you are. You hear the only voice that ever mattered. Baptism is not just a physical act. It's a spiritual activation. The dove didn't descend when Jesus prayed. It descended when he obeyed. And the same is true for you. You've been waiting for breakthrough, for clarity, for identity. But God has been waiting for you to step into the water. Because in the waters of surrender, heaven speaks the loudest. The promised land was always on the other side of water. Before Israel could enter the land God had sworn to them, they had to cross the Jordan. Not just a river, a boundary. Joshua 3:15-17 paints the moment. As soon as the priests stepped into the water, the river stopped flowing, and the people passed through, not ankle deep, not hesitant, but all the way across. The water didn't part for intentions. It parted for obedience. And the same is true for you. There are promises you've been praying for, but haven't possessed, not because God is holding back, but because you haven't stepped in. Baptism is your Jordan, the final break from Egypt, the last line between wilderness wandering and promised destiny. You can't camp in comfort and claim inheritance. You can't cling to old identities and walk in new authority. You must cross. That's why some remain stuck in cycles, not because they're disqualified, but because they refuse to move. Baptism is the movement of faith that shouts, "I am done with where I came from." And until you make that move, you'll keep circling old mountains, repeating old prayers, fighting old enemies. But once you cross, everything changes. Baptism isn't just closure, it's commission. It's not the end of Egypt, it's the entrance to Canaan. Not a finish line, but a starting gate. And when your feet touch the water, heaven will back you. Hell will recognize you. And your wilderness will end. Because every promise waits on the other side of obedience. You thought baptism was optional, a tradition, a symbol. But now you see, it was never meant to be symbolic. It was always meant to be supernatural. Not a public statement, a spiritual surrender, not a next step, a new beginning. You weren't just dipped, you were buried. You weren't just wet, you were resurrected. And maybe for the first time, you finally understand why the enemy fought you so hard to avoid this. Because baptism was never about the water. It was about the war and who would own your future. So now you know you were never unworthy. You were just unburied. You were never far from God. You just never crossed. But it's not too late. Heaven is still waiting. The water is still open, and the voice of the Father is still speaking. "This is my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased." If this pierced your heart and awakened something eternal, comment below. Lord, I'm ready to rise. And if you want to keep hearing what heaven is whispering, subscribe now and step into the depth you were born for.